happy to welcome retired Sheriff Currie Myers, Ph.D., who is a senior visiting fellow at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. He's spoken on criminal justice public policy across the country. Sheriff Myers was a participant in the White House's 2015 Criminal Justice Reform Summit, and he has a combined 30 years of professional experience as a state trooper, a special agent, a sheriff, criminologist, professor, and university executive. So that's quite the resume. I'd say that in 30 years, I hope to amass at least a fraction of that experience. Anything noteworthy that we left out that you that you'd like to mention?
No, it's an honor to be here. I really have been looking forward to this podcast and speaking with you guys. Thank you so much for the invitation. And I've had a very blessed career. I've been very fortunate, very lucky. But I will tell you the importance of goal planning for your own personal life, you know, and saying here by this age, I'd like to do this. And sometimes you don't make it and you can adjust fire. But I've always found that, you know, if you set goals and try to build a playbook to get there, that's, you know, before you know it, you're there on a lot of different areas. So that would be my only suggestion.
And so I'm assuming you're insinuating you did that successfully, goal set and then achieved along the way, or did that just kind of help you stay within the guidelines of what you were hoping to accomplish?
Well, there was always failures. I mean, we all have, you know, failures and drawbacks, but I think pretty much, you know, you try to design it to make it I think the first thing is to make it attainable. You know, you don't want to set and you want to do things that you really want to do and have fun at it. And I think that's what every job I've ever had in law enforcement, I've just had a blast at, and I really enjoyed it. It doesn't mean that there weren't some days that you were sad, and, you know, there's things happen, and I was involved in a shooting bombing incident, and you work homicides and all that kind of, now those are all, you know, things that bother you. But as far as the job itself, I was very fortunate, and I worked for some very good agencies.
And in your current role with the TPPF, can you talk a little bit about what that organization is and what you do for them?
Yeah, thanks. The Texas Public Policy Foundation is, if you're not aware of it, it's not just Texas-centric. It does public policy throughout the entire United States. They're located in Texas, and they focus a lot of their energy on continuing to make Texas a great state with their public policy. About 5 years ago, I started seeing some of their writings and research, and reached out to them and said, I really enjoy what you're doing. If I can help you guys, and in the future, I'd love to play a role. And that was kind of the first introduction. And a couple weeks later, we set up a Zoom meeting and interview, and we kind of all agreed that it would be good for me to come on board and start helping. And it's been 5 years now, and it's gone by quickly, but I have really been fortunate to be associated with Texas Public Policy Foundation, and they have different initiatives, everything from healthcare to immigration to how cities should be run and managed, how states should be run and managed, and they have a criminal justice program within it. So myself, Randy Peterson, and Derek Cohen are kind of the folks that are heading up the criminal justice side of the house for TPPF, and we all do writing and research and public speaking and presentations, and we all kind of help each other along the way. We all have little different areas and subject matter expertise, if you will. But we usually come out with some what I think is some pretty good information and public policy for the future. And I think that's how you guys found out about us, and especially my paper I did earlier in the year on leadership and policing.
Yeah, and I definitely want to talk to you about that. Obviously, that's our main focus of what we're trying to do. I noticed that you guys have Alice Marie Johnson on staff there too as a fellow. I think she's got a really interesting story. And if you know, you could speak a little bit on that, but I think it kind of goes into a lot of the things that TPPF is trying to do with law enforcement, but also criminal justice reform.
Yeah. I think what is unique about TPPF is that it's kind of a bottom-up approach to how we do public policy, because we can't make an assumption, or I don't think we should make an assumption that we know everything to how to make criminal justice better and how to reform it in a positive way. And sometimes you have to include people who have been incarcerated to get an understanding of what they went through and their problems and issues. And this foundation has been very good about reaching out to everyone, not just law enforcement, not just prosecutors, not just elected officials, but defense attorneys, public defenders, and people who have been incarcerated. And I think it's helped us, especially on the overcriminalization part, which is one of our biggest. That's what attracted me to Texas public policy 5 years ago, is that they were really concentrating on overcriminalization, and I was concerned that that law enforcement was being used for some improper enforcement of edicts and regulations that really didn't promote our profession very well. And so that was very important. But if you're going to understand overcriminalization, then you got to talk to the people and who have been victims of that overcriminalization.
So can I ask, in terms
Sure.
of that culture that attracted you to the TPPF, regarding their willingness to seek discussions and research outside of maybe that norm, that mainstream, I guess, research avenue. How did that begin? Like, was that just part of the culture, or from its inception of the program, or is that something that evolved over time? Is it just one person that sort of drove that kind of mentality that we need to be reaching into these different pots to create a combination, or I guess a coalition of research?
Yeah, I think it started. I think it started with that in mind. It basically was a limited government foundation. What can we do to limit government and still be effective?
Mm-hmm.
So that was the initial, reasoning for the organization. But they started bringing people on board that said, okay, we're going to be limited in government, but what does that mean? And how is it best to achieve those goals and actually have successes? Because you can have a rigid approach to something, and if you're not able to make any change, then why are we spending time, trying to, write about these things if nobody's going to follow them, or nobody's
Mm-hmm.
going to be willing to embrace it? So I think finding some common ground, when there's in these difficult political times, there is some common ground between both sides of the aisle. Sometimes you just got to put away the way people are thinking now, but we have to reach out. What are some common goals that want to be done? And things like prison reform, that's attractive to conservatives, and it's attractive to liberals. It's how do we do it, and we get into the weeds where there may be some disagreements, but we've got to be able to find some common ground. So I just think TPPF and their mind strategy was, let's reach out to others, let's get an idea of what they're thinking, and then we can try to build a coalition from there. But we're not going to give up our principles.
Right.
We're going to believe in the principles of limited government and conservatism, if you would.
Law and order.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So going to prison reform and some of the reforms that you guys have been doing, a big question for me has always been, how do you get some ground support from officers in that manner? Just because, officers tend to be sort of black and white thinkers, and, they see laws as needing to be enforced. And, a lot of times reform is a dirty word for whatever reason. I think there's probably more newer officers now that can get on board, but is there things that you think you have an opinion on, or even work you've done that sort of addresses how to reframe some of those things for officers?
Sometimes it can be difficult. There's sometimes I write some things, and I have colleagues and former friends and all that going, I don't agree with that. You know, why are you writing that? A perfect example is asset forfeiture. If you look at asset forfeiture, I was around, I'm showing my age, but I was around as a state trooper in the 80s, and I understand why asset forfeiture came to be. We were losing the crack cocaine war. It was dangerous out there. There was a lot of activity, and you would do car stops and find hundreds of thousands of dollars of monies. You'd find all kinds of gold, jewelry, all kinds of stuff, and there was, and you might not find any, you know, illegal substance, but you know what they're doing, you know what they've been up to, you have other information to form a conspiracy investigation, but the ability to take that property was limited. So when it originally came out under asset forfeiture, I was okay with it because it was linked to criminal activity, and we had to follow the due process of that criminal activity and those investigations in order to make a seizure. So in other words, if there was $10,000 in cash, and I just couldn't seize the $10,000 in cash. The evidence was seized. The $10,000 in cash was seized as evidence, and then I had to prove in the investigation that that money was linked to criminal activity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, nowadays it's morphed into, there's $10,000, we're taking it, and we're filing a civil claim on it, and it's not really linked to the criminal activity anymore. And that's where I just had to sit back and I go, that's not the intent that, you know, that we had when the civil asset forfeiture laws came out, because I was here when it came out, and I understood, you know, what we were trying to accomplish. Law enforcement needs structure, and it needs processes in their laws, and we just can't be going and taking people's property without taking it back to some sort of criminal activity. And that asset forfeiture is morphed into some states like Minnesota. You have a DUI, they can seize your vehicle if you get stopped for a DUI. Well, DUIs are wrong. I mean, you shouldn't go drink and drive, but losing your vehicle and having the government seize your vehicle because you did get convicted of a D, or not even convicted, just arrested for a DUI, that's just a bridge too far. And
They would seize it indefinitely?
yeah, yeah,
Wow.
Wow.
yeah. And then if they were found guilty, it was the agency could take it into their asset forfeiture account and sell it or use it for, you know, their own means. So
Wow.
not every state does that, but some states have really gone too far. And, you know, there's just been accounts where, you know, some people believe in carrying cash around, and, you know, there's often times where they probably were doing something illegal. But at the same time, I think we should always err on the side of the Fourth Amendment. And we should, you know, we raise our hands and swear to our Heavenly Father that we're going to, you know, protect the Constitution of the United States and defend the laws of this country. And that should keep us from going too far with our color of authority.
I think that's a good way to sort of frame it for officers, just to remind them of that. I think there's a fear maybe sometimes that we'll lose tools if we lose the ability to do some of the, you know, some of the overreaching laws are taken away. But I think if it's framed that way, people can get on board for sure.
Well, I think the other thing is you have to also be real willing to reach out to I mean, you know, to have individuals such as yourself now as a sounding board. You know, I'm going to be able to contact you guys now and say, this is an issue, this is what's going on, you're on the street. And the more people we can get opinions from the street, because I'm not on the street anymore, and so I've got to understand how it impacts downstream. And for me to write appropriately and come up with good public policy, which is what my dream is, to have good public policy and to make my profession better. But I can't forget the fact that I need the opinions of the people that are on the street doing the job at that time. And so having you guys as a sounding sounding board now, and possibly others if they're out there listening to this podcast. My hope is that we can form a working group and we can come up with ideas and suggestions, and we may not agree on everything, but somewhere in the middle we're going to find some really good opportunities to make our profession better, and I think that's what everybody wants,
And reasonable. Yeah.
yeah. And so that's what I'm excited about, and I think that's how we get people on board, is that and I think the other thing with cops, it's about trust.
Yes.
Sure.
Do I trust Currie Myers to be objective in his opinions and not have some cognitive bias, even when we disagree? Is he doing it because he cares and it's the right thing to do, or is he having some agenda? And I don't want to ever have an agenda.
Sure. I think cognitive bias is a decent segue, because it jars my memory back to the reason we were even talking with you. Lexi sent me one of your publications on bottom-up leadership, and we were both like, we got to talk to this guy. And I remember she and I had a few email and phone exchanges where it was like, well, he's not going to want to talk to us, but we can still try. So, luckily, yeah, you were kind enough to chat with us about it. And Lexi, how did you come across the article, and what kind of piqued your interest?
So for me, I came across TPPF a while ago with some of the things they were doing with prison reform. It's sort of, I like to think about that kind of stuff and see what different people's approaches are. And I really, the First Step Act was, and then it led me back to TPPF, because they, from what I understand, were a big model for some of the things that came through on the First Step Act. I see, incarcerating for people on low level, nonviolent drug crimes as being just not a good thing for our society. And that was one of the big issues in there. So that's how I discovered the organization, and I signed up for the emails and everything. And I got one for a sort of podcast talk you did. I can't remember the name right now, but you were on there and talking about police reform, and you mentioned your bottom up approach to leadership in law enforcement, which sounded a lot like what we're trying to do and to emphasize. So that's how I found you.
Yeah. Well, you never know who's seeing your stuff, so it's pretty cool, the fact that people are looking at it. But I really encourage people to contact me. I'm not, I really want that feedback, because I do think the more we can get people within our own industry, within our own profession, to offer advice and suggestions, then again, that bottom-up approach should be done for public policy, as well as if you're a leader of a police department or a sheriff's office.
So what was the catalyst for you writing the article, putting some thought into it? Was it just too many interactions with poor leaders, or I mean, I guess that would be sort of stating the obvious, but was there other things outside? Had you seen that bottom-up approach successful in other avenues?
Yeah, those are great observations. I think the first thing is, I have seen horrible leadership in my career. I've also seen some very good leadership. So, and I think, you guys can look back just even in your career, even though you're in the, just in the middle of it right now, but you've seen people that, man, what is this person thinking, from their leadership style. And you can tell when somebody really cares about people as a person, and whether or not they're just very dictatorial. Our profession has a tendency to lean towards people that are probably more dictatorial in their leadership capabilities, just because it comes from a little bit more of a military approach. Interesting enough, the Navy SEALs have kind of come up with a bottom-up approach to leadership, where they really focus on getting information from the ground up, and then their leaders help make that final decision based on the information and outputs that are coming up from the ranks first, and for other partners that are working with them. So The bottom-up approach is I think gaining steam, not just in the law enforcement sector, but the military is also re-examining, do we have a very strict autocratic style of leadership, or should we have a more transformational leadership opportunity, for people to be able to do work. And so for me, I try to always remember the bad. And my dad told me a long time ago is you emulate people that you have respect, and you make sure and learn from people that you have problems with, and try not to do them when you're in those positions. And I think my own leadership style and model was this more transformational type person. Now I have a little bit of the Irish in me, so I can get in it with people, and if we gotta march on, sometimes we gotta march on and make a decision. But it's one of those things that I think you have far less problems if you have an open, honest communication, and you have input and buy-in from the ground up. Then you can be very, very successful in your implementation of goals and new ideas if you just ask people questions ahead of time. Because for every decision, I learned the law of unintended consequences the hard way, and I think that's just because of my age. And the law of unintended consequences is going to bite you, every time. And that's if you don't pay attention to your surroundings, if you don't pay attention to how your decision is going to impact downstream and upstream and side by side with folks, then you're not thinking about, you're probably going to have a failure to launch in that particular area. And so I think it's maybe a natural tendency of maybe more of my personal style, but I've just found it over the years to be much more refreshing. And you really are willing to go bat for a leader who asks your opinions, and you kind of make those decisions all together.
So how might that look in a practical sense? In a large agency, you've got your patrol officers, your immediate supervisors on up to the brass. How could that bottom up, how could that be implemented in a practical manner?
Yeah, say you're a couple of like peons like we are, right? Hypothetically, if we were to try to enact or embody that philosophy, how would it go down?
Well, I think humility is a wonderful thing. And like everybody, sometimes I have problems with we all have problems with humility, because we may get, think that because of our status in something, we think we're special or something. But I think the easiest thing if you're trying to change an organization and you're in a lower level, I think having empathy and being a good person and helping people is so people are always viewing you as someone who, man, I really like that person. They really care about me, that kind of thing. And often, I'm not sure your command structure, in Seattle specifically, but going to them and being honest with them and saying, I'd like to help you. I'd like to, here are some things that we're seeing, and here's some things that we would like to address. And these are opportunities that I want to share with you, and we'd be honored to help you and work with you on it. You never just want to lay it on the lap of somebody and say, the last thing you want to do is just say, hey, everything's screwed up, get it right.
Yeah.
And I think all of us know, as cops, former cops, we can kind of be pretty direct in our complaints. I mean, we have no problem complaining. I think that's in our mindset, just because, we're in a profession that's not easy. And so having a negative bias, and you guys will probably get tired of me saying different types of biases, but I teach my students at Benedictine College in the criminology department. I'm constantly reinforcing about understanding about cognitive biases. But we have negative biases in what we do every day. And I think law enforcement really has it, because we're around 95% of the people we're around is the 5% of the bad population instead of the opposite. And we're get lied to all the time and yelled at. So we just have this huge negative bias. And then you have the agency coming in and we think that they're always screwing with us and, they don't have our back and all that kind of stuff. And I'll be honest with you, in some cases that may be the case, where they don't. But I think a willingness to go speak with your upper echelon ranks with humility and say, I'd like to help, is good. They're going to look at you and go, wow, I mean, that's pretty awesome. And you never know, you might be given an assignment, well, let's look at that strategy. But I do think ultimately the organization reflects the character of the leader, and the right leader has to be chosen to make the culture of the organization one about transformation, and about having the ability to have an organization that's people centered and focused on that. And not every law enforcement executive is going to have that mindset. Some of them may want to come in and say, this is the model, this is what I want to do, and I want, you're going to do it. I just don't think it works. And I don't think it works, especially in today's day and age. When I started in the early 80s, it was, this is your job, you go do it or you're done. And so it was a different world. Law enforcement officers now, it may not be a career anymore. It may be something you stay for 5 or 10 years and you move on, just like all their other jobs that are, people are leaving their jobs. When back in my day and age, that people were still, when I started, people were still staying for a 25, 30-year career, not just in law enforcement, but, regardless where they worked. You didn't leave a job. That was a sign of weakness. And I think today people want to be happy and they want to, be with an agency or an organization that they feel respected and wanted and they have empathy.
How do you think you can teach that to, I know different departments have different ways that they promote people, but often it is has to do with like seniority and test taking abilities. So I'm not of the belief that you can't teach leadership skills, but what are some approaches you think on that next level that we are not on, but on the direct supervisory level, how do you teach that type of leadership?
Well, by and large, the way we're promoting people now is exactly what you said, Lexi. I mean, that's a huge problem, because it's not about taking a test, and it's not about your seniority. I think seniority is an important thing, but it certainly isn't the only thing. And I think taking a test, I think, this is me as an educator speaking, people take tests differently. And some people just are not good at memorization and taking tests when they would actually be excellent supervisors, but they're just punished because their ability to take in information is different.
Regurgitate.
So,
yeah,
it's just, I mean, I'm that way. You put me down and I have to study over a weekend to take a test. I'm not going to do as well as others. I know some people that, and the other thing is, if you have a good cognitive memory and if you have the ability to have retention, you may take a test, and be very successful, but that doesn't mean you're a good leader of people. So, to answer that, I think the question is, we have to do more behavioral interviewing as opposed to test taking when we're looking at promotions. I think we should have ethical dilemmas. I think we should have more open-ended questions. To me, the success of me being one time a homicide investigator is the ability to have patience and have open-ended questions and not talk too much. And the suspect or the person you're interviewing is going to tell you a lot. If you don't, but we have the tendency to overtalk. We have the tendency to not listen, and we don't ask the right kind of open-ended questions. I think for us to go to another level of promotions is that we should sit down with applicants who are looking to be promoted and give ethical dilemmas questions, give open-ended questions, to how they handle things, given open-ended questions to policy and procedure and what they would do in different areas and scenarios, and set back and let them either talk their way out of a promotion or talk their way into a promotion, because you're going to find a lot about how the person thinks, how they operate, what their strategy is, when they're responding back to you. You're gonna understand whether they're a good communicator, and I think leaders should be good communicators. If they have a problem, communicating, then that could be a different area. I think the other thing is we should also need to have meaningful performance reviews. And I don't know about you, but by and large, we do not have meaningful performance reviews in our work. And the performance review should say, this person has a talent in this area. What do we do to groom this officer for future placement in different areas? Because you may have somebody who is, man, this person is going to be, they have great attention to detail. They're non-exhaustive in their work. They ask good questions. This person has the ability to be a great homicide detector. This person, a detector, excuse me, detective, detector. So
that works too.
Yeah, that works too, if we can figure that out. But you could find somebody that has, there are going to be people that you see are developing leadership traits because of how they act out in the field. Those need to be documented, and those need to be, wait a minute, this person is doing X, Y, and Z. So when I go before a performance panel, the whole key is you look at performance reviews and you can see that a supervisor has documented this person had these kinds of leadership capabilities that I witnessed as a senior officer in the field or as a field training officer. But we don't do that. We don't document things. It goes back to negativity bias. When we document something, we document in the negative. We never document to the positive. And so all your focus in a review, and usually the focus when you're writing a review is the things you've done in the last month and not the things that you did 9 months ago or 10 months ago. And so as a supervisor, you should be not only looking for opportunities for improvement in things to talk about for corrective behavior, but you should be paying attention to things they do really well and try to help them get better in those areas that they can do really well, and document those things throughout the year. So you just don't have, the last couple weeks because you have a performance review that came up on your calendar that says I've got to do it. And I don't know, you guys may need, what are your performance reviews? What are you
Well, I always document everything that I do well. I like to scrapbook. I like to scrapbook it, write it in my diary. I keep my own logs. No, but yeah, it's kind of the same. I mean, we have performance reviews, but they're pretty. I would say they're pretty surface level. It's more of like
it's an HR perfunctory thing.
Yeah. It's just a formality, I guess you could say. But I was thinking too that things like, for instance, the board that you alluded to for promotional boards and things like that, or even when you're sitting down with your officer and going through performance reviews, those are all great times to kind of field a litmus test of like, how is this bottom up leadership? How is this person, how are they activating it in their own sort of performance, right? Like asking those questions. And I would love to be sitting on a board for somebody who's up for sergeant or lieutenant and be fielding questions that are maybe veiled as just regular police work questions, but the intention is to find out, hey, like, how are they really putting onus on their officers or empowering their officers to make it to that next step, or to have a voice, or to feel empowered to things like you said at the very beginning of the podcast, to sort of say, hey, I'm here to help. I want to make change. I want to reform these things. Like, I have ideas. Can I go to work on this? That kind of thing. So I think those are really good opportunities to delve into that.
Well, you hit on something that's very important. So the boards that you go through often are whatever rank you're going through, it's rank of people above you that you're setting in front of the board. So if you're going for a lieutenant, there's captains and majors, that are on the panel. Well, to me, the panel it should be about peers. So, and a peer is even the officer on the street. So you're going to know whether or not this person is an officer on the street. You're going to know, they haven't been a good leader to me. They weren't a good mentor or the agency. The other thing is having evaluations done for supervisors that are done throughout the squad. And now some people are going to go, well, that's not going to be fair because you can't be a good manager without, upsetting people from time to time. I completely disagree. Just like in the world of academia, I get evaluated by my students every year. I mean, they're students, and they're going to tell me opportunities for improvement. Now, some of them don't say anything, and you're always going to have that one student that's going to, love you no matter what you did, and you're going to have that one student that's going to hate your guts no matter what you do. Well, you automatically throw those things out. But somewhere in the middle are themes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a big believer in theme development. And I do that even with interviews. There's themes that come up, that bubble up, through an interview process, that are going to identify certain behaviors, certain ideas that you need to capture and go, oh, wait a minute, that's another theme that I need to put over here. And if you concentrate on the themes of somebody, then I think you can get a pretty good general idea of what kind of behaviors, that they're going to have. And so having people from the field actually set on, let's say the promotion is for major. There's no reason why you can't have someone from the field that is a lower level rank set on that. But also, we don't take qualitative analysis anymore, or I don't think ever. I would send out surveys, send out qualitative have panel discussions, have the different shifts get together and talk, send out surveys that say, what do you think of these particular leaders that are getting ready for promotion? And then be able to look at all of the data. You don't look at just one and make a determination, but within all that data are themes that are going to populate, and you're going to start seeing how that person is looked at into the organization, how they're thought of, whether they're well respected. And I think to this day, law enforcement officers want to be led by the best. They're not going to, they don't want to be led by people that are going to let them do whatever. They're going to, they're not going to be, they don't want to be led by people that are, horrible communicators. They're going to make recommendations to the chief on who the best leaders are and who the best field commanders are out there. And again, it's information at least the chief would have to say, I see this information, I see this, my command staff's telling me this, my field level folks are telling me this. I'm going to put all that information together, and I'm going to come out and that way I have a wide range of key performance indicators that are going to tell me which is the right person for the promotion and make that promotion.
I love it.
That's my recommendation.
That's great.
So would you say, because that's all sort of policy changes that sometimes are very slow to happen in established organizations. Yep. Do you think that there are things that we could do, that any organization could do prior to arriving at that kind of large scale policy change that could help some of those newly appointed leaders be better at their job? So something that kind of occurred to me, to give an example, is that we have these boxes that need to be checked that go to sort of the negative bias. Did you follow policy? Do you have a complaint? We're going to have to, note that if you had a complaint, we have to put it to whatever. Mm-hmm. But we don't really have a forced positive bias. So I've been doing some work with a local high school coach who does he calls them positive deposits. And he forced himself for a couple months to every practice, he would force himself to give at least 100 positive reinforcements to his team. And it just occurs to me that there could maybe be some sort of policy or additional thing that supervisors have to meet that would almost force them to have a positive bias towards their officers. So force them to note some of the good things, which in turn would provide opportunities to have larger conversations about, how you did something good, how you could have improved. Do you think there's any policies or things that we could teach those leaders that are being promoted within the structure that we have now?
That's kind of a sticky question. That's a good one.
Yeah, I think there is. I think you have to, number one, we have to have policy and procedure because we're in law enforcement and we need to have guidance on, we have to have the ability to look back and see, oh, this is how to do something. It reinforces proper behavior. So I'm not laissez-faire on policy and procedure. I think they're very important and they're needed. When it comes to promotions and when it comes to performance reviews, the policy and procedures need to be rewritten in order to have a fair and balanced understanding of this person's behavior, both in the positive and in the negative, and from their peers. And you need to just memorialize that and catch it in policy and make sure the policy is developed. So you are correct. Policy is not changed very often, and I think that's a problem. We should be constantly retooling policy. If it works, that's fine, but we should be looking at policy as we continue to get different in our thoughts and how we do things. And I think the military has gone. I have a friend of mine that teaches outcomes-based training, and they've had to completely rethink the military brain on how to learn because they've just been told, one thing, you go do it, and you don't think outside the box. So we have to think outside the box or we're going to get hurt. And so we have to make sure that we have kind of a rethinking on our policies, but give general go-bys on at least the things that they have to have in there in order to make a good evaluation. Now, I'm going to say there's a lot of places that you can't make major changes like this without it going before the police union. And the police union may accept or say, no, we don't want to do that. And that's where I think we have to be very careful about where we have police unions playing a greater role in discipline, in training, in policy decisions, because that could limit the ability to make changes. And that could also slow down the process in order to make changes. And I'm probably guessing that places like Seattle are going to have within their collective bargaining agreements, you probably have some agreement on promotional boards and performance reviews. And so those are things where I'm from in Kansas, we're a right to work state. Texas is a right to work state. Police unions don't have a say in some of those things like they would in some other areas. So I think this is where we have to get our friends and colleagues that are in the police unions to understand we want to make organizations better. We don't want to add bureaucratic delays in making our own organizations better because of some collective bargaining agreement. And that's going to be one of those things that's going to be difficult too. Because I'm not anti-union. I'm not saying that at all. Union plays an important role on pay and benefits and treatment of the officers. But when it comes to certain discipline, when it comes to training, and when it comes to new policies, that's where I think we have to have a better working arrangement with executives, police executives.
Yeah, I think we could go ahead, Lex.
I was just wondering if you've seen anywhere that has done that successfully.
Yeah, I think there's area Johnson County Sheriff's Office, where I was sheriff, has done that. The Sheriff Calvin Hayden, I actually used his. I actually did interviews with his staff when I wrote the paper. When I wrote my paper, Bottom Up Policing, they've done some incredible things when it comes to that kind of bottom up, setting goals and understanding what they are. But they've done it from a culture point of view. They've actually brought all their command staff in and said, this is the future for us and how we're going to do things. And here's the expectations that we're going to have to set in order to get the field level to feel comfortable that they do have a voice in making determinations, and they do have a voice on the promotional side. And so Johnson County Sheriff's done a great job. Rand Henderson, he's the sheriff in Montgomery County, Texas. It's a suburb of Houston. Johnson County, Kansas is a suburb of Kansas City metropolitan area. So it's a large sheriff's office, probably around 1,000 employees. That probably is not large for Seattle, but it's large for a Midwest,
that's about where we're at. But
yeah. And so Montgomery County, Texas is similar. They're about the same size. They're in the greater Houston metropolitan area. Rand Henderson is the sheriff there. Man, Rand is just an outstanding sheriff. He actually did a business plan and wrote the business plan out, shared it with the community, and not only the citizens, but the business community, which having an important relationship with businesses, because a lot of times businesses don't feel like they have a voice because they can't elect somebody. They're not a resident. Where businesses have an important role to play in safety. And so he sent it out not only to his line staff, but the community in general, and asked for feedback, and got feedback from everybody to say, oh, this is the direction that we want to go in Montgomery County when it comes to public safety. And that include training and include, this is how we're going to promote. I just think that transparency and accountability and transparency is really important. There's nothing we should do that we should hide. I mean, there's some cases that we have to do. There's some covert I'm not talking about that, but I mean, from a procedural point of view, this is how we conduct ourselves. That should be a complete open book, and that only makes the public say, okay, they have great transparency. Kind of goes the same thing with police shootings. I've just finished a paper right now that I'm hoping will be released before the end of the year, maybe just right after, but it's called an ombudsman project, which basically there's a lot of departments. If you have an in custody death or if you have a police shooting, the officer and the departments, it becomes adversarial. In many cases, the departments investigate these things themselves. So and that doesn't bode well, in my opinion, for transparency. And so having an ombudsman that has a state police, a state organization that investigates police shootings to be fair and impartial, and that's what they do, probably is a better way to have the investigation of police shootings. And that way the public can look at it as, okay, they don't have a bias. They're from outside. This is what they do full time. And you have an ombudsman that's looking at it and saying, we're going to refer charges to a prosecutor, or we're not. Because we've also seen where prosecutors they've filed charges when there wasn't evidence to file charges, in many cases against police officers. If you look at the Atlanta case not too long ago, you had the prosecutor there filing murder charges against the officers before the Georgia Bureau of Investigation even finished their investigation. And we just don't, we have prosecutors now that are, kowtowing to pressure and prosecuting officers without all the evidence being investigated. And there's so much, I guess one of my real concerns is the lack of due process that we're having, because we're convicted in the court of public opinion, and social media has only made that worse. And so we have many times where officers are, they've had charges filed on them when the investigation hasn't been done yet. And you have social media is already, convicting the person, and then there's all the fallout that's associated with it.
Yeah, I think that kind of all of that goes back to that transparency with the community that you were referencing, and to circle back to how that is involved with that bottom-up approach. I know that bottom-up approach is also, it has this efficacy with developing that transparency with the community. Can you talk a little bit about how a community could see the positive impacts of changing that leadership style to something more of a bottom-up approach?
Yeah, I think right now, the people that scream the loudest are getting what the changes they want, which isn't the right thing. I mean, So 5% are screaming defund the police, or screaming we want total police reform, or as we talked about, I think last time when we first initially talked, reframing or reimagining police, or whatever things that you want to come up with. But it takes legwork, but you have to, the community is more, the community is not just one set. The community is many different areas, ideas, concepts. It's not just residences, it's organizations, it's faith-based organizations, it's the businesses, the communities, and having the ability to have an open and honest, you got to give them some framework, because you just can't go in and open-ended, but having their input on saying, we would like to do this. What are your thoughts? You know, we would like to implement this particular strategy. Tell us the good and bad. It doesn't mean that you're not going to implement it, but it does tell you the minefields that you're going to have to, oh, we didn't realize that. So maybe we don't change this particular thing because of, we didn't realize that this would, impact certain, a certain population or a certain area, or it appeared to be unfair, whatever. So I just think the more that you can take the time to plan things out ahead of time, and having an open-ended discussion on where the future is going to be, you're going to get more information back. I think right now we're just responding to the people that are yelling the loudest, and then we're changing things, or trying to change things based on the people that are yelling the loudest. And it's, the people yelling the loudest, that's the minority. The majority of people love police, respect police, but there's opportunities for improvement. I mean, it's just like us. I mean, there's every day you probably go home and go, I love doing this, but I wish we didn't do this. They're just things that we should be able to do better. And I think it goes back to training. It goes not only this leadership from the bottom up, but we have to spend a lot of time, talent, and treasure training people, and training people the right way.
Absolutely. And to tie again from what we've talked about before, and it sounds like your opinion is that oftentimes it's the patrol officers that are out on the street that can make those connections with the community and provide the most insight into, here are the issues that we're facing here. And if we create that culture of bottom-up policing or leadership in policing, then, you have a better avenue to get some of those things up the chain.
Yeah, I think, and I don't want to say, I appreciate the way you just framed it, because I think it's important. When I'm saying community, talking to different people in the community, I'm not specifically saying you just have a community event and invite people to discuss these things, because the people that speak the loudest are going to attend those too.
Oh yeah.
So it's empowering your officers to understand what's going on in the street, and asking the people that they interact with what we can do better at, and the things that we can do that has a greater impact with that person. So every time we do a service call to a business, it'd be nice to be able to once we have their email or something like that, and a couple weeks later, there's a survey that's sent out. Is there any opportunities for improvement in how we responded? It doesn't mean that we're going to, how was the officer? Is there anything that we can do better? It's not the fact that we're trying to get anybody in trouble. It's somewhere in there, we're looking at themes that we can develop to make it better. We're not looking at every word in the evaluation or the survey. So when you're doing a survey, you should never look at every word that's written about it, because that you're pulling yourself into a negative bias. What you're looking at is, take a step back, and a lot of times I'll take a highlighter and I'll go, that's a theme. This is the theme here. They said this, and I'm not looking at the fact that I'm not getting down a rabbit hole in something that they're complaining about. I'm looking at, well, there's enough people that have said this, then perhaps we should change it. If it's a one-off, then it's a one-off and you don't have to worry about it. I think bureau commanders should walk the streets. I think they should walk into businesses. I think they should knock on doors. A lot of them are going to say, I don't have time to do that. Well, I mean, I understand that, but um, if you're a small town, if you're in a smaller town, a town of 10,000, the police chief should be doing it.
Mhm.
They should be actively involved in their community, and get away from the desk and go walk the street and go talk to people and walk into a business and find out what the real folk are doing. And you can learn a lot about, what you need to do differently and what your officers are doing out on the street
Hmm.
by doing that. But that's a leadership thing from the top up. You got to say, I'm empowering you to go do that. That's an important function of your job, to go do that.
Well, they got to make it to roll call first before then I'll believe it.
Yeah, especially if it's after hours, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Third watch, forget about it.
That's right.
They're all
Or if you're working Thanksgiving or
oh,
Christmas.
yeah.
Or,
Yeah. I don't blame him though. I'd be tucked in with a nice little hot toddy by the fire
I
too.
got sleeping with my little teddy bear, and
Yeah, exactly.
no,
Exactly.
it's not an easy thing. But I mean, it goes back to, I mean, to be honest with you, the officer on the street should be doing the same thing.
Yes.
I mean, and I know everybody might get
Mhm.
blacked out and you don't have time to do it, but just for the purposes of sanity,
Oh yeah.
go speak to the people that you're not arresting and not
Yeah.
having to interact with all the time. Take,
Yeah.
take your, go do something that's going to go, shit, I like people again.
Right.
I say that all the time, especially
Yeah.
to newer officers. Like, you're not going to have to look for negative interactions. It's going to find you. You're going to see
Yeah.
terrible things, but you have to actively work at finding those positive interactions. You do. You just do. Whether that's how you treat the person you've arrested, you ask them some questions, you have a good rapport with them, or it's going into businesses and talking to them, or just talking to the people that are always on your beat or whatever. I mean, those are the things that are keep you mentally sane. And as an added bonus, it'll make your job easier. So
Yeah. It
Yeah.
provides a real richness to your experience as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Or if you're, conversely, if you are arresting somebody all the time and they're a low level offender and you're constantly arresting them, seeing them, sit down and talk with them and understand why, what is going on in their life where that's happening. And they may say, well, I've been to court and they sentenced me to treatment, but the treatment was only 30 days. And there's things that you can ask people to try to dive into what that was the whole purpose around drug courts. I think that how drug courts came is that they realized that we're sentencing people, and in many ways the sentence didn't match what the addiction was doing. I think especially when you looked at early on methamphetamine. If you look, I wrote my dissertation on the methamphetamine epidemic for my doctorate, and at that time we were having traditional 12-step programs that are designed around 30, 60, 90 days for trying to treat methamphetamine addicts and other synthetic drug addicts. And the fact is that because of the effects on the brain with methamphetamine and other synthetics, it could take 12 to 18 months for them to actually that's the treatment that they have to go through compared to someone that's on alcohol or coke. And so you have to ask the kind of questions of whether or not the treatment works and whether or not those standards work. So instead of getting upset that you're making their 10th arrest on this individual, try to find out why the system's failing.
Yeah, you just described Lexi and I's partner relationship. I'd probably be the frustrated one, and Lexi would be the one having like the heart to heart, like, all right, let's talk about your options, all this stuff. And to be fair, we both try to play off of that with each other, but yeah, you're definitely speaking her language.
Well, Callie, I was probably more like you when I was younger, and as I've gotten older, I think about all the other things that are out there. But when I was a young state trooper working Troop A, Kansas City Metro, I was hang 'em all, so that was,
Yeah,
we all go through those kind of stages. So
I just got a ticket in the mail from a young state trooper.
no,
you're just a stat to him now, Lexi.
Yeah, you don't want to get me going on tickets in the mail and tickets via cameras, and those are the over criminalization things that I'm
Yeah.
not fond of.
Yeah, that's a whole other 90-minute
Yeah,
podcast for
no
sure.
kidding.
Well, we've got to have you on again because one of the things that
Yes.
we didn't get into that I want to talk about is I know that you have a passion for sports and the role that coaches play both in the community and the parallels between coaching and a bottom up approach to leadership and a culture around coach-like individuals, mentors, and things like that. So I'd love to have you on again if I can just get a simple verbal commitment from you.
Hey, this can be a monthly thing. I'm with
All
you
Perfect.
right.
on anything. So I enjoyed it, and the coaching side of it and leadership. I've been through a lot of education, and that's all well and good. But most of the leadership that has had the biggest impact on me has been based on team sports or based on group activities, like when I was on a SWAT team, Clan Lab team, a joint task force, or playing football or basketball, that kind of stuff. So you really understand a lot about watching out for each other and helping each other and doing those kinds of things. So they play important roles. And I wish law enforcement would get back to sometimes the old days are good.
Mhm.
Revisit, trying to bring back the things like the police athletic leagues
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
things like that, I think are so important. I mean,
Oh yeah.
you look at the boxing and the things like that were done, in the 30s and 40s and 50s by law enforcement that get kids off the streets. There were some amazing success stories with the PALs.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait to talk about that. So, Curry, thank you so much for taking the
Yeah.
time. I know you're a busy man. We're very, very grateful and indebted to you. So, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much.